Hello, Politics Plus Media 101 listeners. We are very pleased to be back here with David Corn. David Corn, as our listeners know who have heard our previous discussions with him, know that he is the bureau chief at Mother Jones. They know that he's an analyst for MSNBC. They know that he's the author of the Our-Land newsletter. They know that he's the publisher or author of several books, including American Psychosis, which we had a discussion about, including Hubris. So David, I think, is really someone who understands the longer scope of American history and politics. And it's great to get his perspective on what's going on right now. So, David, thanks for joining us again.
Great to be with you guys.
So, David, I wanted to start by discussing JD Vance with you and his selection as the VP nominee by Trump and the Trump team. We've yet to do so on this podcast. We have very strong feelings about JD Vance, none of them very good. But what do you think JD Vance's selection means for the future of the Republican Party? What does Donald Trump picking JD Vance when he thought that he was going to win and not be able to run again, and selecting this gentleman as the VP say about where Trump wants to take the future?
You know, it's a really good question. To begin with, I don't think Trump thinks about the future. Certainly not the future of the Republican Party, what comes after him. So when he's picking JD Vance, it's completely transactional. And he's thinking, is this going to help me in some way or another right now? And also probably thinking, will this guy outshine me? Those are probably the two things that are most present in his calculations. Obviously, did he think that he'd get a lot of money from Peter Thiel and Silicon Valley people for doing this? Did he just like the cut of his jib? Did he like the fact that JD Vance used to be an anti-Trumper who even compared Trump to American Hitler, to an opiate for the working class, said some very, harsh things about him back in 2016 and 2017. One story that I broke recently was that, after Trump won, he said, some of Trump's voters were racists who voted for racist reasons. He said that wasn't everybody, but, remember when Hillary said some of them were deplorable? This is even worse than that. And so he went, on bended knee to Trump when he got into the Senate race in Ohio in 2021, and there were, in the Republican primary, 4 or 5 candidates. It was a pretty full field, and he did not look like the strongest candidate until he got Trump's endorsement. So he really had to bend over and kiss something to get that endorsement. And so maybe Trump just likes the fact that he broke this guy. Trump sort of in his S&M way likes breaking people. So, I mean, those are I think the factors that went into this. I just don't think Trump is considering what does this say about the GOP now or for its future. But as we know, whether Trump intended this to be or not, when you pick a vice president, particularly a younger vice president, often, that sets up a direction for the party when you move from the scene. It didn't happen for Dan Quayle. It doesn't always happen, but certainly happened with Al Gore and Bill Clinton and even Joe Biden or Barack Obama, though Biden was older than Obama. And so, Vance, we can get into this. He just, to me, is this shapeshifter who has just in the last 5, 6 years, 8 years, whatever it's been, has just gone on this remarkable and I think hard to fathom journey. In some ways, maybe reflecting the Republican Party at large. But as I noted, he burst on the scene in 2016 with his, memoirs, the Hillbilly Elegy. And he was very critical of Trump, but he was kind of respectful of Trump voters. So he became this center-right public intellectual who could, for the rest of us, be, an interpreter, an ambassador to Trump country. This is what's happening. I know I come from these people, a little bullshit there, but nevertheless, guy went to Yale and then, worked in VC and for a big corporate law firm. But nevertheless, he kind of carved out this niche for himself where he'd get invited to the Brookings Institution and, be on panels and do a lot of, op-eds, be on CNN a lot. And, it was a good gig. But for some reason, it didn't complete him. He didn't feel satisfied with all this success. And in 2019, he converts to Catholicism. Now, I'm not going to dump on any religion, but it was not in his past. He didn't grow up with organized religion. His family were Christians who didn't go to church. I don't believe his wife was Catholic. So, and not only did he convert to Catholicism, he accepted it in the most conservative form of it. And he became this right-wing culture warrior. So very religious. And this is when he starts saying these silly things like, the Democratic Party is full of cat ladies who won't have kids and they have no stake in the future. And, people are, liberals and progressives and coastal elites are bitter people because they don't have families. I mean, most coastal elites I know do have kids once they get to a certain age. And so he came up with this whole shtick attacking the world that he had just come out of. Yale Law School, VC, CNN, Washington Post op-ed page, and where he'd made a lot of money. And he sort of started demonizing this world, calling AOC sociopathic because, she didn't have kids and she raised the issue of whether, climate change made it less likely for younger people to want to have kids. So really harsh language. That's when he starts saying, women should stay in abusive relationships because that's better for kids. There's a lot of psychology going on there with his background. And he's also saying, there should be no exceptions for rape, for abortion, because, sorry, it's inconvenient if you get raped. But, two wrongs don't make a right in terms of still being against abortion in those circumstances. So he really took this sort of hard right swing that then gets capped, and he gets elected to the Senate, mainly because Peter Thiel put a lot of money behind him, and then Mitch McConnell did. And then he sort of veers further into becoming a Trump champion in 2024, or even a few years earlier, while he had been a Trump detractor. So there's a lot of, as I said, shape-shifting going on in a very short period of time here. I mean, I'd love to ask him about it, but more importantly, I would love to talk to his wife about it.
Yeah, it's funny, David, you're talking about the many faces of JD Vance. You can read interviews or listen to interviews with him today where you can still tell he's a really smart guy. There was an interview he did with Ross Douthat for the New York Times, and you say he actually is still a thoughtful person. But then you see him a week later at an event saying that the UK has become an Islamist country because they elected the Labour Party. And you're like, why are you saying this kind of stuff? But I think that a lot of people have looked at this evolution that he's been on since 2016 and said those must be his sincere views that he's now betrayed. But I kind of wonder if the 2016 Vance was also a bit of a costume as well. If we remember what the GOP were like at that time, the way that he was behaving fit exactly into what he probably thought the GOP wanted and needed. This was the era of the autopsy, the growth and opportunity report, the idea that the Republicans were going to become more sensitive about social issues, more tolerant of minorities. That was going to be the path forward. And everyone was expecting that Trump would lose and that the Republicans would have to go harder in that direction. He seemed like he was putting himself into a position where he could easily be one of the figures that was going to put the Republican Party back together. And there are other leaders other than Trump or people like that too, people like Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell. So I wonder if that was even a real face for Vance or whether that was a costume just like today's is. Do you think that he believes this? Do you think he believes what he was saying in 16? Or do you think that he believes what he said to Ross? Do you think that he believes what he said about the UK becoming an Islamist country? What do you think is the real Vance?
John, I think that's a really brilliant observation. And I don't just say that to suck up to the co-host here. I mean, a lot of people say, well, that's what he believed and he changed his views. It seems to me that he just may be almost as transactional as Donald Trump is. This is a guy, and again, I don't be, get into psychoanalyzing him, but, he's literally has changed his name growing up several different times. and he, on his own initiative, no one forced him to go to Yale Law School. No one bent his arm and said, you must, he goes to, I think it was Ohio State, and then he applies on his own volition to Yale Law School, and then he goes there and, does okay. But he chooses to go into the Ivy League. He chooses to come out and, at the urging of one of his teachers there, professors there, to write a book about and sort of try to make it in the literary political memoir world. And so, it could just well be that he's the type of guy who is being driven more than ideas or values, but by ambition. And when he sees an opening, he moves in and he takes it. And when you're someone like that, if that's your number one thing, you still can be smart. You still can be thoughtful. You can have a thoughtful interview with a New York Times columnist. But when push comes to shove, you make the decision, you say the thing that's going to advance you on the path you're on. So yes, the saying England is an Islamist country, is not just stupid. It's sort of, it's whipping up, it's stirring the pot, right? It's, and a lot of the things he's been saying about Harris and about Walz and about the Democrats. I mean, this guy, who was this thoughtful fellow who went to the Institute of Politics at University of Chicago and would talk, in very respectful terms about Democrats and liberals and Republicans and Trump voters. This is a story I broke a couple weeks ago. He endorsed a book by Jack Posobiec, who, if you don't know anything about Jack Posobiec, all you need to know is he was the guy who pushed the Pizzagate conspiracy theory. And his new book is called Unhumans, not Inhuman, but Unhumans. And it basically says that for the last couple hundred years, there have been a type of human being who has tried to destroy society. And usually it's been communists. There were people in the French Revolution. And that's their goal, to take everything that's good and orderly about society and destroy it. And that's where the Democrats and progressives and liberals are today. They are unhuman. They are opposed to beauty, order, stability, and their goal is to destroy it. JD Vance endorsed this book. He gave a blurb. He said it was worth, it was important. And even if you didn't read the book, knowing that this Pizzagate guy wrote it should warn you off it. So I look at that and I go, what the F? I mean, this guy, at one moment is being thoughtful and used to write op-ed or columns for The Atlantic. And now he's out there, getting in bed with far-right extremist conspiracy theorists who are trying to basically do, I hate to say this, what Hitler did. You call the other side, vermin, not human. They're not really humans. They're something else. This is what the whites said about the blacks in South Africa, in the South and in South Africa. And so, why is he doing this? Well, because he thinks it's going to get him somewhere. He's not thinking about it. So I think in the end of the day, you're right, John. The old JD Vance was not necessarily the true JD Vance, but it was the JD Vance that JD Vance needed to be at that time.
David, I think you're 100% right. The language that folks use, especially when you start to dehumanize people, unhuman, is ridiculous. And that's really, I wouldn't say the start, but it does mark an inflection point towards the march towards extremism and, the fascism coming into action. You did mention Jack Posobiec, the Pizzagate story. You mentioned these extremist views espoused by Vance that sound like your typical Tea Party member. I think the difference between them and Vance is these Tea Party members, which the House Freedom Caucus now, they actually believe them to a person for the most part. So that kind of leads me into some of the justification we're hearing for why Trump picked Vance, which was to energize the base. Now, I thought Trump was going to be sensible and pick a woman to deal with the suburban white
Yeah.
woman issue, his character, abortion. No, maybe a black dude, because that's a focus of their campaign, is they're propping up how much better they're doing with young black men as a voting demographic. No, they went with Vance, and they're justifying it partly because they say he's going to energize the Trump base, which is white, working class, non-urban. So put that in one box. And then if we go and look at who VP Harris picked, it's Tim Walz, who is partly, not only, but partly chosen to appeal to the exact same demographic, maybe not the MAGA voter, but the more independent swing voter that's also that white working class guy. Do you see either as more effective in winning this demographic? And can the selection of a VP, which is typically not have that much impact on a race, can Tim Walz actually help make a dent?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing you got to start with. And this is one thing that Trump got right when he spoke to the National Association of Black Journalists. The vice presidential pick tends not to make a difference in the final outcome. Now, we're having elections these days that are just, the margins tend to be narrow, razor thin. And, we might expect that to happen again in November. So any impact, no matter how small, could be a decisive impact. You don't know what way, how these decisions swing voters one way or the other. All that said, I think I don't know why Trump needed to energize his base. His base is it's pretty energized. They're kind of a cult. Cults tend to be energized and not lackadaisical. And they tend to, react very strongly to what Trump says and does, and to the alarms he sets off and such. And so that's why I thought, like you, Justin, that the smart move would have been to do something that would maybe expand his base a little bit more. If he's making marginal inroads into, black men or, Latino men, find someone who speaks to that. Or if a woman is running, and people are excited, a woman's on the ticket. He didn't know at the time she'd be the head of the ticket, but, maybe, put a woman on the ticket, do that. Tim Scott certainly looked like he got pretty damn close. He was so close to Trump, he could be his food taster once the food goes down his throat. It was just, it was amazing how he sucked up to him. I still think, maybe it would be a good chapter in one of the books later about how he came to pick Vance. I don't think Vance has been as bad as many in the punditocracy has said he's been, but I certainly don't think he's been that great. I think, the Trump diehards, like him because Trump likes him, and he's up there and saying stupid things about England becoming Islamist and so forth. And so, he's doing fine in front of that audience, but I don't think he has shown much appeal yet to a wider audience. And if you look at the Tim Walz pick, it just has seemed to be more exciting, more fun. He seems to, Jerry Maguire, you complete me, whatever. He just seems to complete the ticket really well, not just on demographics. He's an older white guy. She's a little bit young, she's a year or two younger, a black Southeast Asian woman. But it just sort of, they come from different parts of the country. They have different sensibilities, but they really do share the same values. That's what I like about this ticket. That's why I think it makes so much sense. It's not like he expands the agenda. He has the same agenda, but he comes at it a different way in that sort of, prairie progressive, Robert La Follette, Paul Wellstone, way of dealing with progressive issues, which is different than the way it's, that they're sometimes dealt with in urban areas or coastal areas. So it's sort of like, I agree with that. And here's my rhetoric. Here's my reason. When he said at the, when he was his first appearance with her, when it comes to abortion, I'm for the golden rule. Mind your own damn business. I thought that was one of the best political lines that we've heard in years. I hope they chant it next week at the Democratic Convention. I mean, it's kind of what Democrats have been saying, but progressives have been saying, but not in that way. And to connect it to the golden rule was really, which of course is, do unto others as you want others to do unto you, which does have its place within the abortion debate. But I thought it was really good timing, good line. He said it with a little twinkle in his eye. So I think in that way, it's like when Clinton picked Al Gore. It's not as if they were going to get Tennessee out of this, but it kind of just like, okay, the message of the ticket is boosted. The signal here is boosted. We're young, generational change. We like to throw a football around. We're not expanding demographically in this particular instance, but we're getting more oomph to our message. So I think that has a lot to do. And the fact that he, that temperamentally, he just seems to be a fun guy. She seems to be having a hell of a fun time. And, what I wrote about a few days ago was that this, Biden, said famously, this is a fight for the soul of the nation. And that is true. It's the fight for the future of the nation and the future of American democracy. But I think with these guys, you have sort of a happy tribe versus Trump's doom and gloom. America sucks. You can't go out in the cities. I mean, I go to New York. I've been to Minneapolis. I was in Minneapolis a few months ago. It was lovely. People were having a good time. A lot of breakfast places, great bike lanes. People were having a good time. But, for him, everything's a fucking hellscape. Excuse my French. And so you have these guys campaigning on, we want to get all these things done. America has problems. But if we work together, we can solve these problems. And you know what? It will be fun. We're going to have a good time doing this. And the other side is, we're on the verge of complete, total collapse and annihilation. And I'm angry about that. So you have the happy tribe versus the angry tribe. So it's not just a fight for America's soul. It seems to be a fight for America's psyche. If you're angry and bitter and resentful about things not going your way, well, you got people there who are, who speak to you. And if you look at the world and you see things that are not right and that are unjust, and you want to approach them with a large spirit to do something about them, we got to give kids school lunches, so that they can learn at school, whatever, Wallace did in Minneapolis and other things. Then you got a tribe there for you too. And so if you go back and look historically, there are a lot of ways to see, who's going to win a presidential election. Usually the taller person wins, but that may change, as, there are more women getting involved. But usually the candidate who you can identify as the more fun candidate wins. When there's a clear fun gap, like George W. Bush and Al Gore, or then Clinton and George H.W. Bush. And here right now, there is a tremendous fun gap. If you look at Harrison Walls and Trump and JD Vance. And I believe Vance probably has it in him to show good humor, to be, bright. But his job as the vice presidential candidate seems to be a hatchet man. And so even if he has that in him, he doesn't have the lane in which to show much of that.
And before I kick it to John here, I just wanted to add 2 points. Number one, it is safe. I was just in New York City 2 weeks ago wearing a Red Sox jersey during a Red Sox-Yankee series.
Oh, my goodness.
Did not get assaulted. Had a wonderful time. It's the best city in the world.
When I went to Yankee games in the late 70s as a high school kid, I tell you, you would not have made it out alive back then. I remember riots at Yankee Stadium, in the parking lot, just getting Boston Red Sox fans had to run to their cars.
That's Trump's New York. The other thing I just wanted to add is, aside from Tim Walz being comfortable in his skin, the Walz-Harris campaign has reappropriated football, has reappropriated patriotism with the USA chants at the rallies, with the flags. They're the alpha ticket. And it's just very ironic running against Vance and Trump.
Well, the thing, it's kind of interesting because up to, one of Biden's core messages was that Trump is a threat to democracy and democracy is on the line. And, I firmly believe that. And he's, and I think that was right. But it was a message that it was a hard time conveying, people, coming from Biden. And Harris has not leaned into that as much as leaned into the freedom message. Now, there's a Beyonce song called Freedom. I don't think there's a Beyonce song called Democracy, but maybe by November 5th there will be. But so she's, putting a lot of things: abortion, freedom from gun violence, freedom to pursue economic opportunity under this rubric. And it used to be that the Republicans, we're the Freedom Party. They're the they want to make you eat your peas party. But no, it's like we're free. We're for freedom, and it's fun and it's cool because Beyonce's singing about it. Maybe Taylor will get into the action in the next couple of weeks. But you're right. They've really flipped the script, turned the tables on Trump in a lot of ways. And one thing that I've just noticed in the last week or two, Trump just seems to be really flat-footed. He doesn't know how to respond to her, what to do. First he made fun of her laughing and called her laughing Kamala. And who fucking cares about that? That didn't go anywhere. Then, he said the whole thing about her not being black. And then he doubled, when people called him that, he doubled down on that. He just, doesn't really know how to lay a glove on her. And I have to say, I think, in our society, there still are a lot of people who, they see you mistreating a woman, it's a little bit different than mistreating a man. Whether this wrong or right, whether feminists are going to agree with me or not, I don't know. I think with Hillary, it wasn't an issue because Hillary had such high negatives. And there were a lot of people who just didn't like, they said, I'm all for a woman president, but not Hillary. There was a lot of ways to kind of excuse that. But, Kamala Harris, I think, comes across as a smart, intelligent, friendly, fun-loving person. And, and he's out there calling her low IQ, dumb, which he happens to call basically every black person he ever runs across. And he starts calling her nasty. She's a nasty person. She doesn't look nasty to me. And when she says, you have something to say to me, say it to my face, she's sassy. And people like sassy. So he hasn't, so I think, going after her on some of these issues that she's stupid and she's not really black and that she's now making up pictures of crowds, that thousands of people witnessed and the news media reported on. It just strikes me that he doesn't really know what to do. And his instincts have been really good in politics. We have to give him that over the last 9 years. Really, really good. He usually knows how to go to the jugular, the soft underbelly, and, with either stupid nicknames or just, one-liners. We forget. Maybe we don't forget. He's getting old too. And may not, his game, not that he was ever a genius, but his game may not be as strong as it once was. And often, I can say this, I'm getting old. When you get older, you get kind of stuck in your ways. You're not as flexible in your thinking. So what we're seeing from Trump now, people talk about how he slurred with Elon Musk and some of his speeches, that maybe there's some cognitive decline. I think there's certainly some strategic decline, and it could be attributed to age.
Yeah, and I think he's just gotten kind of boring, hasn't he, David? I mean, I think that anyone would when they're in the spotlight for that long. Imagine watching season 9 of what used to be your favorite TV show. But we're hearing a lot of the same stuff. And if you do listen to that discussion he had with Musk, it's quite dull. It really is quite dull. And the fun gap that you're talking about.
That's what I said. I said, this is boring. I turned it off.
In 2016, the fun gap benefited him. Maybe you're right that it was a little bit safer to attack Clinton in a way that it isn't for a lot of other female candidates, maybe because she's partly seen as an extension of Bill Clinton. But the fun gap that benefited Trump last time that you've pointed out isn't benefiting him this time?
You said the following. You had this massive wave of primarily Italian, Irish, and German immigration, and that had its problems and that had its consequences. You pointed to these problems as being higher crime rates, ethnic enclaves, and inter-ethnic conflict. Should the United States have prescribed similar policies to what you're proposing now, including mass deportation, to deal with those issues?
Well, first of all, I also said there were a lot of benefits to that wave of immigration, but has anybody ever seen the movie Gangs of New York? That's what I'm talking about. We know that when you have these massive ethnic enclaves forming in our country, it can sometimes lead to higher crime rates. What we want is an American immigration policy that promotes assimilation, that no matter where you come from, you can become an American, but only if we have an immigration policy that promotes assimilation instead of doing things like what we've done over the last few years, which is have 25 million illegal aliens just setting up shop here with no control, no enforcement, and no real ability to police what's going on.
David, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about one of your recent columns and the choice of Vance and what the parties are trying to do here. So we were talking about how Vance and Walz are both partly selected because we're chasing after the same kind of demographic, the middle America, the mythic white male working class voter in a flyover state, right? And there's this famous book by Thomas Frank from 2004, What's the Matter with Kansas? And the title of the book has become shorthand for this soul searching in the Democratic Party, this aspiration to appeal to exactly these kinds of voters. And the question of why they aren't able to do so, maybe Paul Wellstone, who you reference, or Tim Walz might have a secret ingredient. But even you said, David, that it's unlikely that they're going to start winning over these states. You wrote in your recent column a little bit about what the Republican strategy is to appeal to these kinds of voters. And you were describing about how JD Vance has used racial resentment as a core pillar of his rhetoric when he talks about people in this part of the country and tells them, you know, you're being overlooked because the elites on the coasts only care about racial minorities. They're telling you, poor white person, that you're privileged. They don't understand all the struggles that you have. And, you know, maybe this is part of why Republicans are able to get winning messages to these voters. But I also want to point out, David, that when you look at the margins of victory in these states, I mean, we're talking about what's the matter with Kansas. Let's just look at Kansas. In the last presidential election, the Republicans won the ticket of Trump and Pence, won 56% of the vote. And if you look at Appalachia, where Vance is especially focused, a state like West Virginia, they won 69% of the vote. 69% of the vote. So it's kind of hard to say that racial resentment is driving even most of that because of how many people we're talking about, right? So what do you think it is, David? Do you think that these messages that you pointed out that Vance is pushing, do you think that they're a big part of the political dynamic in this part of the country? Or do you think that it's just something else that we're trying to pin down?
Well, there's a book that came out a few months ago called White Rural Rage by Paul Waldman and Thomas Schaller. It sort of gets into this a bit. I won't get into their theories, but for the listeners out there, I mean, I think there's a lot going on with this group of voters. I think there are lots going on and a lot of different ways to reach them and talk and to talk to them. I think what the Republican Party has generally done over the years is to tell them that government sucks. It can't really do anything to help you with. And what we can do for you is fight culture wars and address your cultural and social grievances. You know, they never come in and really give them jobs. All they want to do is cut taxes. And that rarely brings in new factories. I mean, the CHIPS Act from, Biden did is doing a lot more. And yet these people who say they want, they feel they're being overlooked, don't see the benefit of this because I think they've been basically trained to look at Washington as the enemy and to feel aggrieved on cultural fronts. Hollywood doesn't like us. People don't like Christians anymore. I mean, when I travel, I see these super mega duper churches with 10,000 people, and no one's saying you can't go to these churches. No one's saying you can't teach your kids what you want, can do anything you want. Now, people say, well, if you want to bring prayer into school, put the 10 Commandments in the school, we say no, particularly since there are 13 different versions of the 10 Commandments. So which one are you going to pick? The Presbyterian, the Episcopal, the Catholic, or out of the Old Testament, the Jewish one. I mean, but by and large, there's tremendous religious freedom in this country. And no one ever says you really can't say Merry Christmas. Some people, say Happy Holidays, but big effing deal about that. But they've been, I think, taught over a couple of generations here, John, that, that the only thing a politician can do for them is fight a cultural battle for them, symbolically about trans stuff or maybe abortion, which is a bigger issue and affects more people. And I think it's been hard for Democrats to, totally fight through that and convince people, hey, we passed the Affordable Care Act. 17 million or whatever Americans, maybe you, now have health insurance that you wouldn't have before. When did the Republicans ever do anything like that for you? Trump says he wants to kill it and give you something better. He had 4 years to do it. He didn't even put a memo on the table. He said he wanted to do infrastructure. He didn't do it. We're building bridges, with $1 trillion. And I think, these are arguments that Biden could have made and that Harris might make more forcefully that won't turn the tide on this stuff, but maybe cut some of the edges. And what I was talking about JD Vance, which I found fascinating when I drilled down into this for that piece I wrote, was that, he was out there, when he was hillbilly elegy guy and more of a centrist a few years ago, saying, these people have been overlooked, the opioid crisis, the deindustrialization of the Rust Belt, and, people haven't helped them. And I agree. He's right with that. That's sort of pure populism. And that's stuff that Paul Wellstone and other people have been saying, Democrats and progressives have been saying over the years. What he did, which I found completely fascinating, was he merged this, he melded this to a war on wokeism. He says, so what happens is these elitists on the coast who don't care about you, they make their money and they don't care if your towns are being destroyed and hollowed out and industry is leaving, because they're still pocketing, lots of wealth. So they don't care. And then what they do when you complain, they then use, the woke thing and that, and say that you're white privilege to shut you up, to stop you from complaining about your economic travails. I said, whoa, now that's really sophisticated. So he's taking this idea that wokeism is being used by corporate America, elites in academia, people in Washington, Wall Street, big tech, is being used to shut up middle America from complaining about the economic decline that's happened since the Reagan years, that Republicans are as much responsible for, if not more so. I mean, what I don't get, you go back to Kansas, these people are upset about being overlooked in Ohio and everywhere else in Mississippi. Who runs these states? They're all run by Republicans and have their governors and their state legislatures that are busy deregulating and giving tax breaks. Have they turned around any of this stuff?
And it's also true, David, of the industries that he's pointing out too, right? I mean, he talks about big tech, but Vance must surely be aware that his political career is owed entirely to big tech, right? And Ivy League.
Yeah, I mean, Peter Thiel, Mr. Big Tech himself, you gave $15 million to get this guy, to be the Republican nominee for Senate in Ohio. So, I mean, there's a lot of hypocrisy here, but I did have to, take off my hat to this very clever, interlacing of populism with, racist anti-wokeism, which he hasn't talked about as much explicitly as a vice presidential candidate. I mean, I think he did this when he was talking to conservatives. I mean, I heard him explain all this when he was on conservative podcasts and not in front of big audiences, not under tremendous scrutiny. And we do know he's the type of guy who likes to think big thoughts, and he likes to talk about his big thoughts. And even if they're stupid and won't play well before a national audience, he's been saying things for years, but now he may, tone things down a little bit.
New concerns this hour over cyber threats to the 2024 presidential race after Donald Trump's campaign said it was hacked. The revelation came after Microsoft reportedly detailed foreign agents' attempts to interfere in this year's elections. CBS News campaign reporter Olivia Rinaldi joins us now with more on all of this. Olivia, good to see you this morning. Let's start with this. What kind of evidence do we have from the campaign about this hack?
Yeah, good morning, Chanel. Really big news from over the weekend where the Trump campaign says that they have been hacked and they're linking it to Iran. So this was an announcement that they had made on Saturday after our colleagues at Politico had reported this. And they didn't offer any specific evidence tying it directly to Iran, but they did point to this Microsoft report that was released on Friday. And in that report, it detailed attempts of Iran to influence, really, and interfere with the presidential campaign. In the report, it says in June 2024, Iran's intelligence unit sent a spear phishing email to a high-ranking official of a presidential campaign, and they were posing as the compromised email account of a former senior advisor.
So, David, the last question we have for you, and I wish we had more time devoted for this because I'm extremely passionate, and I come at this for the audience. I come at this from experience working in a campaign and creating opposition research, and we get to ask one of the preeminent investigative journalists about his perspective on a topic that kind of involves both. So for the audience, Roger Stone and the Trump campaign were allegedly hacked, including a vetting dossier, which was taken on Vance. These are documents, folks, that I used to create. When people think of opposition research and the dark arts in politics, they think of innuendo, they think of rumors. That's not the most effective stuff. The most effective stuff is publicly available information that is out there in the public domain. And then it is packaged in a way that creates a narrative that resonates with a specific demographic of voters. So it's not the information itself, it's how that information is framed and who that information is given to and the public relations strategy behind it that makes it effective. So one of these documents that has 271 pages of this stuff, not all of it negative, was hacked from the Trump campaign, leaked to Politico, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. But unfortunately, David, from my perspective, those three outlets are refusing to publish the information because they are taking the Trump campaign and Roger Stone and Donald Trump at their word that it was from an Iranian hack. And they think that they are, doing some greater good. So I wanted to get your perspective on whether or not it should be published and whether or not publishing it goes against the Pentagon Papers, goes against WikiLeaks, goes against 50 years of journalistic canon that I've researched, at least.
It's a great question, and hard, I think, to answer definitively. Because if you start with 2016, the Russians hacked a lot of stuff from the Democrats. From the DNC and from John Podesta, the chairman of the Hillary Clinton campaign. And it was leaked through WikiLeaks and others to journalists who, particularly on the second leak in October of 2016, basically every day there was a story on something about that was bad for the Hillary Clinton campaign. And all this stuff was kind of like inside political gossip. It wasn't like that she had knocked over a bank, anything. It was that maybe someone had said something negative about Bernie Sanders in an email. What do you expect? He's not even a Democrat and he's trying to take the nomination away from the establishment Democrat. Big whoop. It's not a big story. But they were making every day they were turning these leaks into big stories. Well, without covering the real story, which was that Putin and Russia were trying to help Trump win, and that Trump himself was aiding and abetting that effort by denying it was happening. He kept saying, this isn't the Russians, this ain't happening. and and this all kicked in right after the Access Hollywood tape came out. So back then, I and others, and since then, have said that the media totally screwed it up by focusing on these juicy little political tidbits without focusing on the main story. And so now 8 years later here, we see something happening again, and it's unclear. It hasn't been confirmed. The sources, and I think there should be somewhat of a balancing act. I mean, there are some indications that it might be a foreign actor, Iran, and certainly Iran would probably not want Trump to get reelected the way that Putin would like him be elected again, the way that Putin would like to see him back in the White House. And so I do think there has to be some sort of balancing test here, and see kind of what's in the material. Can it be confirmed? Is it worth reporting? I mean, I saw opposition research from the Senate campaign that was done, like a 200-page document. On JD Vance's Senate campaign, and it's full of a lot of great stuff. It's almost all public, linked, as you note. So it's nothing that that you couldn't, but it may be something that missed much attention, didn't get much attention, or missed national attention. And so I'm looking at this document and looking to see if there's anything that deserves further coverage. And so I'd have to see the material that was leaked, and to see to what degree it was really newsworthy enough. I mean, I'm sure, you can certainly use it too for leads, even if you don't publish it per se, before, making a final judgment here. But I do think, if something, indicates that JD Vance has a secret bank account in the Cayman Islands, and, he's getting money from sources on the deep web, and that comes to you through a means like this, well, that's something if you can confirm it, if it's true, it's something that you're going to have to publish, and you can't just say, well, because it was from a hack, I can't use this.
So just to follow up, since you have that, the Senate document, doesn't it speak to the thought process of the campaign, what the campaign viewed as his vulnerabilities, the things that they were highlighting, prioritizing by the position it is in the research book, which is how these books are created. And then you can say it speaks to Trump's decision-making into go ahead and pick him. So the justification from Politico back at the time of WikiLeaks was this gives us a view real time into the decision making of the campaign and the public. It's all in the public domain. So once something's in the public domain, it can't be unseen. That same argument can be applied exactly to this dossier and these vetting materials. Yeah, right. So it just seems very arbitrary, and like they're trying to be arbiters of truth, and it should publish.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think you want to publish it, you want to contextualize it as well, and you want to say, what is important, what's not important. So, kind of depends what the material says. But if the material says we think he's a liar, and we've caught many instances of him lying, and if you pick him, there could be a problem with this. Well, that may be something that is indeed worth reporting.
Well, David, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's been great talking to you guys. It's been too long.